The most dangerous minute of your day may be the one when you first put your feet on the floor and do everything on autopilot. After 60, I see this again and again. A person wakes up, gets up sharply, rushes to the bathroom, reaches for the phone, hurries to the kitchen, pours strong coffee into an empty, slightly dehydrated body, and does not even notice that the brain and blood vessels have already entered the most vulnerable part of the morning. It is precisely in the first hours after waking that the risk of stroke and other vascular events rises, and one of the reasons is the abrupt morning surge in blood pressure that happens when a person gets up and the body switches from sleep to activity too fast. That is why I want you to listen especially carefully today. Not because I want to frighten you, but because too many intelligent, decent, disciplined people lose health over something that looks harmless. They say, "I have lived this way all my life." And I answer, that is exactly why the trap is so convincing. What was forgiven at 40 is often no longer forgiven at 65. The body changes quietly. The vessels become less flexible. Pressure becomes more sensitive to stress, lack of water, salt, sleep, medication timing, and even the very act of getting out of bed. Age itself is linked with a stronger morning pressure rise, and high blood pressure remains one of the main modifiable causes of stroke. And here is what surprises many people most. They think danger lives somewhere far away, in a diagnosis, in a dramatic ambulance scene, in a terrible family history. In reality, danger often lives in routine, in habit, in that little chain of actions that feels ordinary. I have watched people protect themselves from sugar, walk in the evenings, avoid alcohol, take vitamins, and still expose the brain every morning to an unnecessary odor because they never learned how delicate the transition from sleep to wakefulness becomes with age. I remember one man very clearly. Calm, educated, retired engineer, 68. He was not careless. He monitored his food, kept his papers in order, took pride in not making a fuss about health. But every morning he lived the same way. Alarm, sharp rise from bed, quick trip to the kitchen, very hot coffee, no water, no pause, no check of how he actually felt. He told me, "Doctor, the morning is when I need to gather myself." What he did not understand was that his body was already gathering itself too aggressively. His pressure at the clinic was acceptable, yet the morning jump at home was a different story. That is the problem with the brain. It often suffers not only from what is constantly high, but from what changes suddenly. The mature brain does not like jerks. It likes rhythm. It likes a calm start. It likes when blood flow is not forced, when the heart is not suddenly whipped forward, when the vessels are not squeezed by stress, haste, nicotine, strong caffeine on an empty stomach, or forgotten tablets that should already have been working. During the early morning hours, blood pressure naturally climbs, and studies in older people with hypertension have shown that a pronounced morning surge is linked with a markedly higher stroke incidence than in those with a smaller surge. The exact number depends on the population studied, but the message is simple. The morning jump is not a trivial detail. So today I want you to look at your morning not as a small private ritual, but as a medical event. Yes, a medical event. The way you cross that short bridge between sleep and full waking can either protect the brain or load it. This is especially important now, after 50, after 60, after 70, when many people already carry silent damage in the vessels without feeling it. Sometimes there are no warnings at all, no pain, no obvious signal, only fatigue, a heavy head, a little dizziness, blurred thinking, a sense that the morning is just not my time. But sometimes that is not character. Sometimes that is physiology asking for respect. And I want to ask you something very simply. How do you wake up? Not how you wish to wake up, not how you imagine yourself in your best week, but how it really happens most mornings. Do you lie still for even half a minute and let the body switch on? Do you sit before standing? Do you drink water before coffee? Do you give your brain a calm start, or do you launch the day as if your body were still 35? Please be honest with yourself here, because this is where prevention begins. Many people spend years looking for one magic pill, one secret supplement, one miracle exercise, while the real turning point starts earlier, in the half-asleep minutes nobody takes seriously. And by the very end, I will tell you the most important point of all, the one many people truly do not know, even those who believe they are being careful. It is simple, but it changes everything when you understand it. For now, remember one thought. The brain does not forgive arrogance in the morning. It rewards steadiness. It rewards patience. It rewards the person who does not jump into the day, but enters it wisely. And if you already feel that this conversation speaks to your life, subscribe and press like now, because this kind of information protects people not with noise, but with timely understanding. And keep listening carefully, because what seems like an innocent morning reflex often becomes the first link in a chain that ends very badly, while a small change can begin turning that chain in the opposite direction. When a person has lived a long life, routine begins to feel trustworthy. That is why the most dangerous habit is often the one that seems the most innocent. After the sharp rise from bed, the next mistake usually follows almost automatically. The body is still dry after the night, the blood is naturally a little more concentrated, the pressure is already climbing toward morning activity, and instead of helping the brain with something simple and physiological, the person either gives it nothing at all or sends in a strong stimulant first. Coffee on an empty stomach, black tea brewed too strong, a cigarette on the balcony, hurried movement from room to room, emotional news on the phone, irritation over messages, arguments in the head before the body has even fully awakened. People call this starting the day. In reality, for the vessels, it can be a sudden test they did not ask for. During sleep, the body loses water through breathing and normal evaporation. That is not a disease. It is biology. But with age, the feeling of thirst often becomes weaker. A younger person may compensate without thinking. An older person may not notice the shortage at all. And then the morning begins in a state that is not dramatic enough to be called an emergency, yet quite enough to burden the circulation. The brain depends on stable blood flow. It does not like extremes. It does not like when the blood pressure is driven upward at the same time the body is still relatively dehydrated and the heart has been asked to accelerate before the internal balance is restored. I often explain it this way. Imagine a careful gardener with an old but precious irrigation system. At night, the water rests in the pipes. In the morning, a wise gardener first checks the flow, opens the valve gently, lets the pressure settle, and only then runs the system fully. But many people treat their own vessels more roughly than they would treat garden pipes. They wake up and force everything at once. Then they are surprised by heaviness in the head, noise in the ears, weakness in the legs, or that unpleasant feeling when the room seems to move for a second after standing. They dismiss it. They say, age. No, sometimes that is not age speaking. That is the body warning that the morning transition is too abrupt. There was a woman in her early 70s who once told me something that I remember word for word. She said, I thought dizziness in the morning meant I was not fully awake yet. She was active, independent, proud of taking care of herself, but every day began identically. She opened her eyes, reached immediately for the phone, read distressing news, got up quickly, hurried to the kitchen, swallowed tablets with a sip of coffee, and only much later remembered about water. She was not lazy. She was disciplined. That is precisely why this is worth understanding. Discipline without the right sequence can still harm. Her blood pressure later in the day was often acceptable. The weak point was not the afternoon. It was the first hour after waking, when the brain was facing too many stress signals at once. And this is where mature age changes the whole picture. After 60, the vessels are less forgiving. The mechanisms that regulate pressure when changing position become slower. The kidneys handle fluid balance differently. Many people take medicines that influence pressure, heart rhythm, urination, sleep, or blood viscosity. Add poor sleep, snoring, sleep apnea, late salty meals, or anxiety, and the morning becomes even more fragile. A habit that once felt invigorating may now work like a hidden strain. The person says, "Coffee wakes me up." Sometimes it does, but the question is not whether it wakes you up. The question is what price your vessels pay for that awakening when it is done too soon, too sharply, and instead of what the body actually needs first. What does the body need first? Usually not heroics, not stimulation, not speed. It needs a gentle return to circulation. Before the first cup of coffee, before the first alarming headline, before the first argument with the world, the brain benefits from something very modest: a pause and water. Not a leader, not a ritual that turns into obsession, just a calm glass of ordinary water within the first minutes after waking, followed by a slower rising sequence. It sounds almost too simple, which is why people underestimate it. But medicine is full of quiet truths that do not look impressive and still save people from serious trouble. Science has long shown that dehydration, even mild, can worsen attention, increase fatigue, and influence how the cardiovascular system works. In older adults, inadequate hydration is especially common because thirst signals are blunted and other conditions interfere. When the body starts the day already a little behind and then receives caffeine or nicotine first, the morning surge can feel even harsher. I am not saying coffee is forbidden for everyone. I am saying the order matters. At 25, the body forgives disorder. At 65, order becomes treatment. The micro-action for tomorrow is very simple, and I want you to take it seriously for 7 days, not casually for one morning, and then forget it. Place a glass or bottle of water near your bed tonight. When you wake up, do not spring upward. First breathe, then sit, then drink some water slowly. Only after that stand up. Delay coffee a little. Delay the phone even more. Give your brain 5 to 10 protected minutes before the outside world enters. You may be surprised how different the morning feels. Many people notice less fog in the head, less irritation, less shakiness, and a calmer heartbeat. Some even tell me that the whole day becomes less jagged simply because the first minutes stopped being violent. And here I want to be slightly strict with you because false confidence is dangerous. Do not say, "It is only water, how much can it change?" People say the same thing about seat belts until the day they need one. We are not speaking about magic. We are speaking about reducing an avoidable burden on a system that is already working harder with age. The brain is not asking for extravagance. It is asking for respect. Respect is shown in sequence, in timing, in small acts performed consistently. There is another layer to this that people rarely consider. A rushed morning often means the nervous system enters the day already on edge. The pulse rises faster, breathing becomes shallow, muscles tighten, thoughts scatter, then breakfast is skipped or swallowed too fast, medication is taken carelessly, and by midday the person says, "I do not feel right today." But the day did not become difficult at noon. It was built that way before sunrise. Health in later life is often decided not by one dramatic event, but by dozens of small physiological negotiations the body goes through daily. The morning is one of the most important of those negotiations. I have seen patients change this one sequence and begin to feel something they had forgotten was possible. Steadiness. Not excitement, not a dramatic burst of energy, but steadiness. A clear head, better balance, less internal rush. And once a person feels that, they begin to understand something very important. Prevention is not punishment, it is not a list of denials. It is intelligent self-protection. It is the wisdom of not provoking the very weakness you are trying to avoid. So tomorrow morning, before you ask the body to perform, help it recover from the night. Before you stimulate, restore. Before you hurry, orient yourself. Before the world enters your mind, let the brain receive what it needs most. A calm beginning. And from there, another quiet but very powerful detail appears, one that many people overlook for years, although it can change not only pressure and dizziness, but the entire tone of the day in a way that is far deeper than most expect. And once the body has received that first sign of respect, the next hidden danger becomes even clearer, because water and a slower rise help only partly if the morning itself is poisoned by another habit people defend almost proudly. They say, "I need to know what happened overnight." They reach for the phone before the feet are warm, before the eyes have fully focused, before the heart has settled. They open the news, messages, market reports, family problems, political arguments, frightening headlines, photographs, noise, urgency. In 1 minute, the brain goes from sleep to alarm. And then people wonder why the pressure jumps, why the chest feels tight, why the face becomes hot, why the hands tremble slightly around the cup. They think information is harmless because it has no smell and no weight, but the nervous system does not judge by weight. It judges by threat. The mature brain is especially sensitive to the first emotional tone of the day. That tone is not a philosophical matter. It is biology. When the brain senses danger, even symbolic danger on a screen, the body responds as if it must prepare. Stress hormones begin to rise. Blood vessels tighten. The heart works harder. Breathing becomes shallower. Muscles brace, thoughts narrow. In a younger body, this may pass more easily. After 60, especially in a person with high blood pressure, diabetes, sleep problems, extra weight, smoking history, or a family history of stroke, that wave can be far more costly than it looks. This is one of the most underestimated truths in medicine. The brain does not clearly separate a tiger from a terrifying headline when it comes to the first fast reaction. Of course, the situations are not equal in reality, but the stress system still responds. It reacts to threat, conflict, urgency, uncertainty. That is why some people feel unwell after only a few minutes of morning scrolling. They are not weak. Their nervous system is doing exactly what it was built to do. The mistake is not in the reaction. The mistake is in feeding the reaction at the most vulnerable moment of the day. I once spoke with a man of 71 who insisted that the phone kept him mentally sharp. He liked to wake up and immediately read several news channels, then answer messages from relatives, then check financial updates. He believed that this habit proved discipline and intellectual engagement. But every morning he also had pressure spikes, a feeling of internal rushing, heaviness behind the eyes, and occasional numbness around the mouth that frightened his wife. He had already convinced himself this was simply the price of being active and informed. When I asked him to delay the phone and the news for 1 week, he looked at me as if I had proposed something childish. A week later, he returned calmer. Not cured, not transformed into another person, but calmer. He said, "I did not realize how much I was attacking myself before breakfast." That sentence was wiser than he knew. There's a reason I am dwelling on this. At mature age, people often focus only on the physical side of stroke risk. They think only about cholesterol, blood pressure tablets, salt, or walking. All of that matters. But the brain is not a pipe. It is an organ deeply tied to emotion, rhythm, sleep, stress, and the meaning we attach to each morning. A frightened or irritated brain changes the body. Day after day, year after year, this becomes a pattern. And patterns become physiology. Scientists have shown repeatedly that acute stress can raise blood pressure and strain the cardiovascular system. Morning hours are already a time of higher vulnerability because of the natural rise in blood pressure and changes in hormone activity. If a person adds sudden emotional agitation on top of that, the load becomes even more unreasonable. I am not saying that every morning headline causes a stroke. That would be absurd. I am saying that when the body is already vulnerable, repeated avoidable stress in the first minutes of wakefulness becomes one more push in the wrong direction. Medicine is often about understanding which pushes accumulate. Think of a violin string. Tighten it a little and it produces a clear tone. Tighten it too much, too suddenly, too often, and it either sounds harsh or breaks. Many older people live with their nervous system tuned too tightly from the first minute of the day. Then they say, "I do not understand why I am always tense," but tension does not come from nowhere. It is rehearsed. Morning after morning, the body practices alarm until alarm begins to feel normal. This is also why some people complain that their mornings have become joyless. They say, "I used to wake up and feel life ahead of me. Now I wake up already burdened." Often, the burden enters through the screen before the window curtain is even opened, before the body has received light, before the lungs have received a deep breath, before gratitude, orientation, and basic calm have had any chance at all. The world barges in, and the brain begins the day defending itself. That is not wisdom. That is surrendering the most sensitive minutes of the day to outside chaos. So, what should replace this habit? Not fantasy, not empty positive thinking, not some artificial smile exercise that insults your intelligence. The replacement must be simple, practical, and dignified. For the first 10 minutes, protect the mind from invasion. Wake, sit, drink water, Let your eyes find natural light, even if the sky is gray. Breathe more slowly than usual. Not theatrically, just slower. Look at one stable object. Feel where your feet are. Ask yourself one sober question. How do I actually feel this morning? Not how should I feel, not how quickly can I become useful, but how do I feel? This question alone often prevents people from forcing themselves through dizziness, weakness, or unusual symptoms that should not be ignored. Please understand, I am not telling you that one proper breakfast will erase stroke risk. Anyone who speaks that way is not speaking seriously. Risk grows over years and from several directions at once. But the morning meal is one of those daily turning points where you either support the vessels or irritate them. You either create steadiness or invite swings. You either make the brain's work easier or harder. And here another very important layer appears, because even a calm waking and a sensible breakfast will not fully protect a person who ignores what his own pressure is doing in those first hours. This is where many educated, responsible people make one of the costliest mistakes of all. They assume that if they feel more or less normal, the numbers must also be acceptable. They trust sensation more than measurement. And in vascular medicine, that confidence can be terribly misleading. And this is where I want to slow down a little, because here people often make mistakes not out of laziness, but out of misplaced confidence. They say, "I would feel it if my pressure were dangerous." That sentence has misled more families than you might imagine. The brain is not always generous with warnings. Blood pressure can rise quite high in the morning without producing a dramatic symptom that forces a person to stop. Some feel only a slight heaviness in the head. Some notice a little flushing in the face, a faint noise in the ears, unusual fatigue, a sense of inner tension, a bit of unsteadiness. Others feel almost nothing at all, and yet the vessels are already under strain. This is why I become especially firm on one point after 60. Do not build your sense of safety on sensation alone. Build it on what is actually happening. The morning is not only when stroke risk becomes more sensitive, it is also when blood pressure may behave very differently from what the person sees later in the clinic or in the afternoon at home. Many people are reassured by decent daytime readings while a hidden morning surge has been doing its work for years. They are not lying when they say, "My pressure is usually normal." They are simply missing the most revealing window. I have seen this in men who were absolutely convinced they were in control. Disciplined men, orderly men, men who kept papers in folders and medication boxes arranged by day. One of them, a retired military officer, measured his pressure only in the evening because that was when he had time. His readings were not perfect but acceptable enough to calm him. Meanwhile, his mornings were full of a heavy head, impatience, and that peculiar feeling of heat rising into the face after getting up. He treated it as temperament. When we finally looked closely at the first hours of the day, the picture changed. The problem had not been hiding in the evening at all. It had been greeting him every morning. This matters because blood pressure is not only a number, it is a force acting on vessel walls. When that force rises too sharply in older, less elastic vessels, the brain is exposed to stress it does not need. A person may survive that stress many times and conclude there is no problem, but prevention is not built on the fact that something bad did not happen yesterday. Prevention is built on the knowledge that repeated strain eventually finds the weak place. People sometimes misunderstand measurement. They treat it as a ritual for anxious people or as something to do only after symptoms appear. No, correct measurement is not fear, it is respect for reality. A thermometer does not insult you by showing fever. A glucose meter does not offend you by revealing instability. A pressure monitor does not create danger by displaying a number. It only removes illusion. And illusion, especially in vascular disease, is expensive. There is also a second mistake hidden inside the first. Some people do measure, but they do it badly and then trust the result blindly. They walk around, talk, rush, cross their legs, sit awkwardly, measure immediately after climbing out of bed or immediately after an emotional phone call, and then take one number as final truth. A reading without context can mislead almost as much as no reading at all. What matters is a calm, repeated, understandable pattern. So let us make this practical. If you are over 60, especially if you already have hypertension, diabetes, excess weight, kidney problems, sleep apnea, a history of smoking, high cholesterol, previous transient neurologic symptoms, or a family history of stroke, the morning pressure deserves attention. Not obsession, attention. For 7 days, measure it properly in the first part of the morning, after you have risen calmly, after a short quiet period, before rushing into the day. Sit with support. Rest for a few minutes. Keep the arm at the right level. Take 2 readings with a little space between them if possible. Write them down. Not just the number, but also how you felt, what time you woke, whether you slept badly, whether you had coffee already, whether you were upset. Patterns often reveal themselves where single numbers do not. I'm not telling you to diagnose yourself. I'm telling you to stop living in the dark. There is a difference. The mature person does not become a slave to numbers. He becomes informed by them. That is very different. Blind fear is harmful. Blind confidence is also harmful. Calm information is what we want. There is an old habit among strong-willed people to dismiss minor warnings. They say, "It will pass." Sometimes it does. But this phrase becomes dangerous when it is repeated too often in response to the same morning signs. A heavy neck, pressure behind the eyes, sudden unusual dizziness, brief difficulty finding a word, clumsiness in a hand, numbness that fades, strange imbalance when walking to the bathroom. Many people excuse these things because they resolve. That is exactly why they can be missed. A transient ischemic attack, what people sometimes call a mini-stroke, can pass quickly and still be a serious warning that a full stroke may follow. The brain sometimes whispers before it screams. I remember a woman of 66 who felt, on several mornings over 2 months, that her right hand was not listening properly for a minute or two while fastening buttons. She laughed about it. Her husband said it was probably arthritis or poor sleep. She believed him because the symptom vanished. When she finally mentioned it, not dramatically, just in passing, it was clear that the body had been giving warnings that should never have been ignored. This is why mature health requires honesty. Not panic. Honesty. When something unusual repeats, the wise person does not wave it away simply because it disappeared. Science and practice agree on something very simple here. Hypertension is one of the strongest modifiable risk factors for stroke, and morning hypertension can be particularly important. Some patients appear controlled in the clinic and are not controlled at home in the morning. Others are treated, but the timing or duration of medication coverage is not ideal for the early hours. This is not something a person should guess about casually. It is something to observe carefully and discuss with a doctor if the pattern looks wrong. And I want to add another layer, because many older adults take medicines faithfully, yet still make errors around them. They forget whether they took them. They take them at changing times. They move doses around depending on plans. They skip because the pressure seemed fine yesterday. Or they take supplements and over-the-counter products without considering interactions. This is not stubbornness in the dramatic sense. It is ordinary disorder. But ordinary disorder is enough to make the morning less safe. A mature brain likes consistency. Vascular protection also likes consistency. Think of pressure measurement as checking the weather before a voyage. A sailor does not control the sea by looking at the sky. He simply becomes less foolish. That is what we are doing here. We are reducing foolishness. We are refusing to let habit speak louder than evidence. The micro-action for tomorrow is one of the most valuable in this entire conversation. If you have a reliable blood pressure monitor at home, use it correctly for 1 week and write down the results, especially the morning values. If you do not have one and you have risk factors, consider obtaining one and learning to use it properly. Do not measure 10 times a day in fear. Measure intelligently, calmly, repeatedly enough to see the truth. If you notice consistently high readings, unusual spikes, or symptoms that concern you, that is not material for self-comfort. That is material for medical discussion. And while we are here, let me be completely clear about warning signs. Sudden weakness on one side, a drooping face, trouble speaking, sudden severe dizziness with imbalance, sudden vision changes, sudden confusion, sudden severe headache unlike usual, loss of coordination that appears out of nowhere. These are not things to watch for a bit at home. These require urgent action. The price of waiting can be devastating. Many people lose precious time in the morning because they hope the symptom will politely go away. Sometimes it does. Sometimes that hope steals the treatment window. But even before emergencies, the quieter lesson remains. A person who measures wisely begins to understand himself better. He sees how sleep affects the morning. He sees what stress does. He sees how late salty food, too much alcohol, poor medication timing, and rushed awakening show up in the numbers. This knowledge often changes behavior more effectively than any lecture. The body becomes persuasive when it is observed properly. And from there we arrive at another point that many do not expect. Even when people wake more calmly, hydrate, avoid immediate stress, eat more steadily, and begin to monitor pressure properly, they still often carry one morning habit that keeps the vessels under silent attack. It is a habit people excuse by calling it comfort or reward, or my only pleasure, though in reality it acts much more like a daily insult to the brain than a comfort. That point deserves special seriousness, because it has destroyed far too much health while pretending to be ordinary. And that ordinary insult very often arrives wrapped in the language of relief. It calms me. It helps me wake up. Without it, the morning does not begin. People say this about cigarettes most openly, but not only about cigarettes. Sometimes it is a cigarette with coffee on the balcony in cold air. Sometimes it is a vaping device used as casually as a teaspoon. Sometimes it is a small morning drink on weekends that the person refuses to count because it feels harmless. Sometimes it is a habit of stepping out into chilly air half awake and forcing the body into a sudden vascular spasm while calling it freshness. Different forms, same mistake. The person is seeking comfort and stimulation at the exact hour when the brain needs protection. Let us speak plainly. Nicotine is not a friend to aging vessels. It raises blood pressure, tightens blood vessels, disturbs the lining of the arteries, increases strain on the heart, and contributes over time to the very conditions that make stroke more likely. People who have smoked for decades often stop hearing this, not because it is untrue, but because it has become too familiar. Familiar truths are often the easiest to ignore. But the brain does not care whether the warning sounds old. It still pays the price. The older the person becomes, the less room there is for this kind of self-deception. At 40, the body may hide the cost more easily. At 68, 72, 78, the reserve is smaller. The vessels are stiffer. The blood pressure is more reactive, the recovery is slower, and the consequences of each insult accumulate more visibly. Yet this is exactly when many people cling to the habit more tightly because it has been woven into identity. They do not say, I smoke. They say, this is my moment. They do not say, this strains my vessels. They say, this is the only thing that is mine. I understand the emotional truth inside that sentence. I do. But emotional truth does not cancel physiological truth. I once treated a man who had reduced many risks with admirable seriousness. He walked more, he lost weight, he took his medications, he ate more reasonably, he even measured his blood pressure. But every morning, after waking, he would stand by the kitchen window with strong coffee and 2 cigarettes before breakfast. He called it his quiet time. When I asked why that ritual mattered so much, he answered honestly, because then I feel like myself. That is where many battles are truly fought, not in laboratories or prescriptions, but in the meaning people attach to what harms them. He was not ignorant. He was attached. Those are not the same thing. I told him something that stayed with him. A ritual is not sacred because you have repeated it many times. A ritual is sacred only if it protects life or deepens it. If it steadily weakens the brain you're trying to keep clear, it is not a ritual. It is a trap with sentimental decoration. That sentence offended him a little at first, and perhaps it should have. Some truths need enough sharpness to break through the softness of excuse. Science has shown again and again that smoking is one of the clearest avoidable causes of stroke. It harms blood vessels directly, increases clotting tendencies, accelerates atherosclerosis, and raises the likelihood of both ischemic and hemorrhagic events. Even secondhand smoke is not harmless, and although risk falls after quitting, many older people assume it is too late for benefit. That is one of the most damaging myths in mature health. It is not too late. The body may not become young again, but it can still become less burdened. That matters. Less burden means fewer insults. Fewer insults mean better odds. Now, let me widen this beyond smoking, because many people congratulate themselves for not smoking while preserving the same pattern in another form. A very strong coffee in an empty, dehydrated body, taken not after a calm beginning, but as a whip. A weekend morning alcohol habit excused as tradition. Sudden exposure to cold as if the body were a machine that must be shocked into operation. These things do not carry equal risk, of course. I am not pretending a cold balcony and a cigarette are identical. They are not. But they share a principle. The body is treated as something to jolt, not something to guide. And after 60, jolting becomes a foolish strategy. There was a woman who had never smoked a day in her life and was quite proud of that. Yet every morning she walked directly from bed to the terrace in winter with no time for the body to adjust, believing the cold air hardened her. She also drank very strong coffee immediately and often skipped breakfast. She had recurrent morning spikes in blood pressure and spells of lightheadedness she found mysterious. What looked to her like toughness was, in fact, repeated provocation. Again, the problem was not in one dramatic act, it was in a chain. The body rarely loses an argument to one small mistake. It loses to a habit that returns daily and is defended emotionally. This is important for mature viewers because many of you belong to a generation that respects endurance. You were taught to bear discomfort, not dramatize, not complain, not make a ceremony of self-care. There is dignity in that. But there is also danger when endurance turns into permission for needless harm. Wisdom later in life is not about proving how much abuse the body can still tolerate. It is about deciding what abuse no longer deserves entry. So here is the micro-action, and I want it to be treated with seriousness. For the next 7 mornings, remove one vascular insult from your first hour after waking. If you smoke, delay the first cigarette and begin reducing the grip of that ritual deliberately. If you use nicotine in another form, do not pretend it is innocent merely because it looks modern. If your coffee is currently the first and strongest blow of the day, soften the sequence. If cold air is part of a harsh waking ritual, let the body adjust first. The brain needs fewer assaults, not clever explanations of why the assaults are special. And let me say something humane, because moralizing helps nobody. Many habits survive not because people are stupid, but because they are lonely, tired, anxious, or carrying old grief. The morning cigarette is sometimes not only nicotine, it is companionship. The strong coffee is not only caffeine, it is structure. The balcony ritual is not only air, it is a moment of ownership before the demands of the day begin. If you do not understand the emotional job a habit is doing, replacing it becomes much harder. So ask yourself honestly, what is this morning habit giving me besides the substance itself? Quiet? Pause? Identity? A sense that the day belongs to me for 5 minutes. Once you know that, you can begin to preserve the human need while removing the harmful form. One man replaced his cigarette ritual not with some cheerful nonsense, but with a very plain, dignified routine. He sat by the same window but with water first, then a calmer coffee later, and he wrote one sentence each morning on a notepad. What condition am I in today? At first, he hated the change. Then he noticed that the old ritual had not been giving him peace at all. It had been creating strain, and then calling that strain comfort. The replacement was not exciting. It was better. Mature health often advances not through excitement, but through quieter honesty. If you are listening to me and thinking, I have done this for 30 years. Surely it would have harmed me already if it were truly that bad. Be careful. Much of vascular damage does not announce itself loudly every day. It accumulates silently until one morning the body cannot negotiate any longer. That is why prevention feels boring to people who do not understand time. The body understands time very well. There is another reason this matters so deeply after 60. Time becomes more visible. People begin to understand that health is not only about adding years, it is about protecting the quality inside those years. Clear speech, stable walking, a face that responds naturally, a hand that can button a shirt, the ability to read, cook, drive, think, laugh, remember, recognize the people you love, and remain yourself. Stroke threatens not only life, but continuity of self. That is why these ordinary mornings deserve respect. They are not empty hours, they are the hours in which independence is either defended or quietly placed at risk. So let me leave you with this in the clearest possible form. Do not jump into the day as if your body were young enough to forgive anything. Do not force a dry, sleepy, vulnerable system with coffee, nicotine, panic, sugar, salt, and speed. Do not trust how you feel more than what you observe carefully. Do not ignore repeated signals just because they pass. And do not spend every morning trying to repair what your evenings keep damaging. The wiser path is calmer than that. Prepare a better night. Protect the first minutes after waking. Give the brain stability, not drama. Do this for 7 days seriously, and many of you will feel a difference. Do it for longer, and you may be protecting far more than comfort. You may be protecting your future mind. And here is the bonus truth I want you to keep close. The goal is not to become fearful of mornings. The goal is to stop wasting them. A good morning does not need heroics. It needs order. It needs patience. It needs self-respect expressed in small acts. Mature health is often built exactly there, in the things other people call unremarkable. But a life is not preserved by what is remarkable. It is preserved by what is repeated wisely. You still have influence over more than you think. That is the encouraging part. You may not control age itself. You may not erase every risk. But you can absolutely change the way the brain is greeted each day. And that is not a minor victory. That is a meaningful act of self-protection, dignity, and responsibility toward the people who love you and rely on your presence. If this spoke to you seriously, subscribe and press like now, and share this with someone who still believes that dangerous habits must look dramatic to be real. Very often, they look ordinary. That is why they are so dangerous. And that is also why changing them can protect something priceless. Take care of your brain with calm discipline, and it will serve you far more faithfully than any rushed morning ever will.